It began with a single trembling sentence that no one expected to hear. Well, I believed it anyway, you know. I wasn't getting any thrill out of performing. Thought it might be time to close it up, you know? A confession hidden in a silence for over 3 decades. And when those words finally surfaced, they stunned the entire world of music. The voice that spoke them belonged to Bob Dylan, the man many called the living soul of the 20th century, the poet who turned truth into melody. And the person he was referring to was John Lennon, a name that once made the entire planet weep. In a world that had already crowned both men as legends, Dylan's quiet admission carried a weight unlike any other, raw, unfiltered, and painfully human. It wasn't just another celebrity revelation. It was the sound of one icon reaching across time to another, burdened by guilt, respect, and memories too heavy to speak of for years. But what exactly did Dylan mean by those haunting words? Why did he wait so long? And why, when he finally spoke, did the world feel as though time itself had stopped? To understand, we must go back to the beginning, to the night when two of the greatest musical minds in history met for the first time, unaware that their friendship would become both a creative spark and a silent war. When people speak of Bob Dylan and John Lennon, they often imagine two extremes of music's soul. Dylan, the wandering poet of America, weaving metaphors through the dust of the open road. Lennon, the dreamer of Liverpool, armed with a guitar and a message of love powerful enough to change the world. One was rebellion wrapped in folk, the other, freedom dressed in pop, and between them lay a strange mirror, a reflection of admiration and jealousy, of kinship and rivalry. Two artists who saw in each other what they both desired and feared. It all began in 1964 after a Beatles concert in New York City. At the Delmonico Hotel, a private gathering awaited. The host that night, a rising star named Bob Dylan, fresh from the success of his album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. That night would become legendary. Dylan arrived with a bag of marijuana and introduced it to the Beatles for the first time. John Lennon was drunk. Dylan laughed. And in that hazy room filled with laughter, smoke, and the scent of youth, two of the century's greatest songwriters looked at each other for the first time and recognized themselves. Lennon admired Dylan's courage, the way he used music to speak truth, not to please. Dylan, in turn, saw in Lennon something rare, a pop star with a poet's mind. Their meeting lasted only a few hours, but when they walked out of that room, neither man would ever write the same way again. Before meeting Dylan, Lennon's songs were filled with love, hope, and innocent joy. Afterward, his lyrics turned introspective, filled with loneliness, doubt, and irony. And as Lennon's tone grew deeper, Dylan began to sense something uncomfortable, a reflection of himself staring back. When Lennon released Norwegian Wood in 1965, with its cryptic storytelling and metaphorical tone, Dylan heard an echo, too close to home. To answer, he wrote, fourth time around, mirroring Lennon's song structure, but with veiled tension. She worked on my face until breaking my eyes. A quiet warning from one artist to another. Many believed it was Dylan's subtle jab, a message that Lennon clearly understood. He later admitted he felt mocked, even exposed. From that point on, their connection became complicated, admiration laced with unease, friendship haunted by comparison. Each man followed the other's work obsessively, but the closer they looked, the more they realized they were walking parallel paths that could never fully meet. By 1966, the quiet admiration between Bob Dylan and John Lennon had begun to twist into something darker, a rivalry fueled not by hatred but by reflection. Each man had become a mirror for the other's insecurities. When the cameras rolled during the filming of Eat the Document, their awkward reunion was caught on tape. Dylan looked exhausted, worn by fame and the endless weight of expectation. Lennon, sitting beside him, tried to appear calm, but the tension was palpable. Two geniuses trapped inside the silence of their own thoughts. They didn't need words, their expressions said it all. Respect, discomfort, and an unspoken understanding that neither could truly outshine the other. Soon after, Dylan suffered his infamous motorcycle accident, a crash that nearly cost him his life. He retreated from the public eye, disappearing from the stage that had once been his kingdom. Meanwhile, Lennon's own life was shifting. He left behind the cheerful optimism of Love Me Do and Help, diving into songs filled with rebellion, loneliness, and experimental madness alongside Yoko Ono. The two men were drifting apart, yet somehow still orbiting the same sun. Their paths crossed again, not in person, but in philosophy. When Dylan embraced electric rock, abandoning his acoustic roots, Lennon scoffed. When Dylan later turned to Christian faith in the late 1970s, releasing A Slow Train Coming, Lennon again pushed back, writing songs that rejected the very idea of divine dependence. He insisted that human beings must take responsibility for their own actions. It was as if their music had become a private dialogue, two old friends speaking through songs instead of letters. Dylan never replied directly. Instead, he chose silence, his favorite form of confession. Even in that silence, Lennon never stopped listening. He still admired Dylan, even when he disagreed with him, and Dylan, though distant, always regarded Lennon as one of the few who truly understood what music could be. Their rivalry was no longer about success. It was about truth. Lennon believed music should confront the world, demand change, challenge hypocrisy, fight injustice. Dylan believed it should explore the soul, to make sense of chaos within oneself. Two philosophies equally noble yet forever at odds. In private, Dylan once admitted that he didn't dislike Lennon because of jealousy, but because they were too similar. Both men were stubborn, brilliant, and unafraid to question everything, including each other. And when two storms meet, there's bound to be thunder. By the end of the 1970s, they had stopped communicating altogether. Years passed, but somewhere inside, Dylan still carried the ghost of that friendship, the one he never got to fix. And on a cold December night in 1980, that ghost would come back to haunt him forever. December 8, 1980. New York City was wrapped in an ordinary winter night, quiet, cold, unaware that the world was about to change forever. Outside the Dakota Building, the home John Lennon shared with Yoko Ono, a man stood waiting. His name was Mark David Chapman. All day he had lingered outside the gates, clutching a copy of Double Fantasy, Lennon's latest album. When Lennon arrived earlier that afternoon, Chapman had approached him timidly. "Could you sign this?" John smiled, scribbled his name, and even posed for a photograph with him. No one could have known that the man standing politely in the shadows would, within hours, end one of music's most luminous lives. That night, at 10:50 p.m., as John Lennon and Yoko returned home, Chapman stepped out from the darkness. He pulled out a .38 special revolver and fired 5 shots. 4 bullets struck Lennon's back and shoulder, one piercing his lung and aorta. John staggered toward the lobby, whispering, "I've been shot." Moments later, he collapsed. Police rushed him to Roosevelt Hospital in their patrol car, not waiting for an ambulance. But at 11:15 p.m., the doctor's voice broke the silence. "John Lennon is dead." Outside, sirens wailed. Chapman didn't run. He simply sat on the curb under the glow of streetlights, reading The Catcher in the Rye. When officers surrounded him, he said only one chilling line: "I wanted to punish Lennon for being a phony, for preaching peace while living in luxury." He was sentenced to life in prison, a punishment that continues to this day. But no cell could contain the shock that swept across the globe. Within hours, news of Lennon's death reached every corner of the world. Crowds gathered outside the Dakota. They sang Imagine through tears. Major television networks aired tributes that lasted for days. And on December 14th, millions across the planet stood in silence for 10 full minutes, honoring the man whose songs had taught them to dream. While the world wept, Bob Dylan remained silent. That same night, Dylan was on tour in Portland. When the news reached him, he canceled his concert and locked himself in his hotel room. He refused to speak to anyone. He gave no statement. He wrote no song, not a single word. For the man who had always used lyrics to express his soul, this silence was louder than anything he'd ever sung. Years later, when asked about that night, Dylan said quietly, "I don't want to talk about it. It was like the Kennedy thing, a shot heard round the world." Simple words, but within them lay an ache so deep that no melody could carry it. Friends later revealed that Dylan spent days alone listening to Lennon's old recordings. Each note reminded him of what was lost, not just a friend, but a reflection of himself. When he was invited to perform at a 1985 memorial concert in Liverpool, Dylan refused. "I can't go on stage unless it feels sincere," he said. It wasn't out of disrespect. It was grief, raw, private, and too sacred for the spectacle. From that moment, Lennon's death became a turning point in Dylan's life. Their disagreements about music, faith, and fame no longer mattered. What remained was the unspoken truth that both men had been chasing the same thing all along: to bring music closer to the truth of being human. Lennon had once said that Bob Dylan could make people believe every word he sang. After Lennon's death, that compliment haunted Dylan, because now there was no one left to say it again. For years after Lennon's death, Bob Dylan carried a silence that spoke louder than any song. He went back on tour, yes, but something in him had changed. He played, but no longer for applause. He sang, but each lyric seemed shadowed by something unsaid. The man who had once turned pain into poetry now appeared haunted by a wound that no melody could close. By the mid-1980s, the world believed Dylan had moved on. He recorded new albums, gave occasional interviews, and even received standing ovations wherever he went. But those who truly knew him, those few who had shared his inner circle, whispered of a different truth. They said he still avoided Lennon's songs, that he would pause whenever Imagine came on the radio, that in his notebook, tucked between lyrics and sketches, there was always a single photograph of John Lennon, folded, worn, and never spoken of. His grief was private, but it lived inside every word he sang. Dylan had always been a man of metaphor, yet when it came to Lennon, even poetry failed him. He once said, "John didn't die because of music. He died because people couldn't understand music." Those words cut deep, a reflection on a world that twisted love and art into violence and obsession. And so, Dylan stayed quiet. He never made a public tribute, never wrote a eulogy. For decades, that silence remained heavy, deliberate, sacred. Until one day, 32 years after that night in New York, Bob Dylan finally spoke again. In 2012, he released an album called Tempest, and on it was a song that stopped the world cold, Roll On John. 7 minutes long, written like a prayer, sung like a confession. It wasn't just a song about Lennon's death. It was a song to him. With a trembling voice, Dylan sang, "Shine your light, move it on, you burned so bright, roll on, John." Each verse felt like two spirits talking across time, one gone, one left behind, both still searching for peace. For the first time, Dylan allowed the grief he had buried to become melody. It was redemption, not through apology, but through art. In Roll On John, he recalled the gunshots, the night air, the sirens, the silence. He revisited the pain he had refused to face, and by singing it, he set it free. The world listened in awe. It wasn't the usual poetic Dylan, cryptic and clever. It was raw, tender, stripped of pretense. The old rivalry was gone. What remained was love, simple, weary, and honest. That song became the final chapter of a story that had begun nearly half a century earlier, back when two young men had met in a smoke-filled hotel room, both believing that music could change the world. And in a way, they were right, because even in death, Lennon's spirit still sang through Dylan's voice. To understand the depth of their bond and the confession that came decades later, one must return to where it all began, long before fame, before rivalry, before tragedy, back to the moment when two boys from different worlds began their journeys toward immortality. Bob Dylan was born Robert Allen Zimmerman in 1941 in the small mining town of Duluth, Minnesota. He grew up in a modest Jewish family in an America still reshaping itself after the Second World War. From his earliest days, Dylan was drawn not to the textbooks of the school, but to the rhythm of radio. The twang of country songs, the sorrow of blues, and the rebellion of early rock and roll spoke to something inside him that words alone could not reach. By his teens, he was performing wherever he could, cafes, bars, college halls, his voice raw, his lyrics restless. At the University of Minnesota in 1959, he took on the name that would one day become legend, Bob Dylan, inspired by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. It wasn't just a name, it was a declaration, a promise that his life would be built from words and melody. In 1961, he dropped out of college and traveled to New York City, chasing the ghost of Woody Guthrie, the folk hero who taught him that music could be a weapon of truth. That same year, Dylan released his first album, modest in sales but rich in conviction. And within a year, his songs, Blowin' in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changin', made him the voice of a generation. He was barely 22, yet his music carried the weight of centuries. Each lyric cut through America's conscience, speaking of war, injustice, and freedom, not with anger, but with understanding. Folk music had never sounded so alive. Across the ocean, another young man was on a parallel path. Born John Winston Lennon in 1940 in Liverpool, England, his childhood was marked by loss and longing. After his parents separated, John was raised by his Aunt Mimi, a strict woman with little patience for his rebellious streak, but who saw the spark in his eyes. When Lennon lost his mother at 17, music became his refuge. He gathered a few friends, formed a skiffle band called the Quarry Men, and started playing small gigs. One fateful night in July 1957 at a church festival, John met a teenage guitarist named Paul McCartney. That meeting, two boys, one stage, one song, changed the history of music forever. Soon after, George Harrison and Ringo Starr joined, and the Beatles were born. Their sound was fresh, bright, and joyful, love songs that made the world dance. If Dylan's music questioned society, Lennon's celebrated life. But underneath the joy, John's lyrics carried a quiet yearning for purpose, for truth. In 1964, during the height of Beatlemania, Lennon first heard Blowin' in the Wind. He was stunned. How could something so simple feel so infinite? He listened to the freewheelin' Bob Dylan throughout the Beatles' American tour, captivated by the poetry, the honesty, the courage to say what others wouldn't. By 1965, Lennon's writing began to shift. Songs like Norwegian Wood and Nowhere Man reflected introspection, loneliness, and wit, echoes of Dylan's influence woven through the melodies of pop. The admiration was mutual. Dylan, who once dismissed pop music as shallow, found himself fascinated by Lennon's wit, his intelligence, and his ability to reach millions with words of hope. They were opposites, yet they completed each other. Dylan longed for Lennon's lightness. Lennon envied Dylan's depth. Each man's art became a response to the other's existence. By the end of the 1960s, their lives had taken different turns. Dylan, recovering from his motorcycle crash, withdrew into privacy, exploring newer styles and faith. Lennon, with Yoko Ono, transformed from pop idol to activist, a man demanding peace in a world at war. Though they rarely spoke again, there was always respect. A bond unbroken, invisible, eternal. In interviews, Lennon often mentioned Dylan as one of the few who truly understood what it meant to live through music. And Dylan, even in his rare public words, always reserved a quiet reverence when John's name was spoken. Their story, born from rebellion, rivalry, and revelation, became something greater than friendship. It became a dialogue between souls, carried on through melody long after words had ceased. John Lennon's life ended at 40, but death, in his case, did not silence. It amplified. What he left behind was not only music, but a philosophy, a belief that peace and love were not naive ideals, but acts of courage. Since that winter night in 1980, millions have kept his voice alive. Imagine, across the universe, working-class hero, songs that seem to exist beyond time, as if Lennon were still whispering to the world. Bob Dylan once said music was the only language that could outlive death. Lennon proved it. For Bob Dylan, the years that followed were not about glory, but endurance. He carried on, traveling from city to city, standing beneath dim stage lights, letting his weathered voice tell the stories that felt older than himself. He rarely spoke of John, but when he sang, you could feel Lennon's shadow in every note, especially in Roll On John. To the audience, it was a song. To Dylan, it was a prayer, a farewell, a confession, and a promise all at once. In 2016, when Dylan received the Nobel Prize in Literature, it felt like a moment that both men had built together. For decades, Lennon had fought to prove that music could change the world. Dylan had just proven that it could define it. Two voices, one silenced too soon, one still echoing across time, together reshaped what it meant to be an artist. Even now, Dylan continues to tour, his face older, his words wiser. At times, when he closes his shows with Roll On John, the lights dim, the crowd falls quiet, and it feels less like a concert and more like a seance. Two old friends finally at peace of speaking through music once more. Lennon's legacy lives on through Yoko Ono, who has kept his message of peace burning like a candle in the dark. Each year, on his birthday and the day of his passing, the Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland beams light into the night sky, a symbol of the hope they once dreamed of together. Their son, John Lennon, carries that spirit forward, both as a musician and as the guardian of his father's archives. And Julian Lennon, John's first son, honors that legacy through his own art, especially in Saltwater, a song that feels like a conversation with the father he lost too soon. To this day, Imagine remains one of the most streamed songs in human history. Its lyrics, simple yet profound, continue to comfort those seeking light in times of division. And across the ocean, in every performance hall where Dylan sings, the past breathes quietly through the strings of his guitar. John Lennon once said, "Reality leaves a lot to the imagination." Bob Dylan proved that imagination, when turned into song, can become reality itself. Their story, one born in smoke, rivalry, laughter, silence, and forgiveness, reminds us that art is not about victory or fame, it is about truth. The kind of truth that can survive wars, generations, and even death. Two men, two worlds, one conversation that never really ended. John Lennon dreamed of a better world. Bob Dylan lived long enough to keep singing for it. And so, as the lights fade and Dylan's voice trembles through the final refrain, "Roll on, John," we understand. Music never dies. It only changes voices. And so, the story ends not with applause, not with tears, but with a single echo that still lingers across generations. Bob Dylan and John Lennon, two men who never truly said goodbye. Their friendship began in smoke and laughter, drifted through silence and distance, and ended in songs that outlived them both. When Dylan sings "Roll On, John," it is not just for Lennon, it is for all of us, for anyone who has ever lost a friend, for anyone who still believes that music can heal what the world has broken. More than 4 decades have passed, yet the message remains the same. As long as there are hearts that still dream, as long as there are voices that still sing, their spirits will keep rolling on. So the next time you hear Imagine or the quiet strum of Dylan's guitar, close your eyes and listen. Because somewhere in that space between silence and song, two souls are still having their eternal conversation. If stories like this move you, if you too believe that behind every melody lies a life, then subscribe to this channel. Join us again as we uncover the untold stories of legends, where every note is a heartbeat and every life leaves behind a song.